Who is the most baddest person you've ever met? I had gone on a rock climbing trip with a group of about 15-20 people to Red Rocks over the new year, and we're out at different crags every day through the area. There were a lot of climbers and other groups in general, but there was this one older man in his 70s early 80s I would guess, that I saw every single day just hiking through and watching people climb wherever he went. He seemed very quiet, but still kept good pace and you could tell he was spry. I kept noticing him the first, second, and third days we would always pass him at some point, no matter what area we went to. He felt like a Red Rocks spirit to me, always doing his rounds and always watching, but never being paid attention to, just witnessing. The next time I had seen him was at the top of this crag a couple days later, and I was taking a break from any climbing. I decided to wander up to him and watch the same group of climbers as him. Turns out he came from Germany a long while back as a boy and came to the area when rock climbing was beginning to take off. We started chatting about the beta and moves that this one girl had to complete to get up this 5.12b, not an easy route, and he was able to predict perfectly the sequence of moves she was going to do, and in about 4 moves, fall because of a very specific hold and body position on the route. The girl followed his guess perfectly. He continued to do the same for every group climbing around us, including my own friends on the wall. He knew every intimate part of every route that he could visibly see. I had to ask how he knew everything about all the climbs, and he told me to bring him my guidebook. He proceeded to flip through page after page and say, "Yup, that's me. First ascent. Me. That too. My friends did these once." I inadvertently had sparked a conversation with one of the original climbers of the area, who literally wrote the book on it. He told me about how he stopped climbing after all him and his friends had been associated with the book and info, and after someone had gotten injured, they had sued his friend group and essentially ruined his life for a long time and took the sport from him. Since then almost all of his original climbing friends had passed, and so he spends every day of his retired life out in the rocks when possible just watching people climb his original routes. We are going back to Red Rocks again this New Year's and I really hope I get the chance to run into this legend again. Guy fought with the Polish underground during WWII, went on the toughest deals, got captured 3 times and sent to prison camp, escaped 3 times, got captured again just before the liberation, killed one of the guards and put on the guard's uniform because the Russians were liberating the Polish prisoners and the British were taking charge of the German guards. Later gets it sorted out that he's Polish and would have been killed if left to the Russians. Gets sent to London and emigrates to US. Trained as a nurse. He was the most unprepossessing tough guy ever, but he was a tough guy. Glad I knew him. Had this thing at school where I met an old man. This was back in early 2000s. I was talking to a group of people like most 16-year-olds do. I talked about how school sucked and it's hard to compete with everyone. Old man tells me to count my lucky stars for my opportunity. I kind of blow it off. 30 million later I'm in the auditorium to hear a guest speaker. The old man gets on stage and tells his story. His name was Walter Wiener and he was a Polish Holocaust survivor. When he was my age he was held in Buchenwald. He told several stories about how he had planned to charge the gates so they would kill him. A couple about being in line to be executed and feeling relieved. After he told his story I realized uncomfortably exactly what he meant when he said I should count my lucky stars for the opportunity. He was badass because he was ready to die from the pressure he was under, but chose to keep going. He pushed through, and on the other side of that tragedy, he had a family, a home, and a life of constant gratitude. I came back from a deployment and got out of the military. I lost a big part of my identity and was in a deep depression. When it got down to the darkest points I thought about Walter and how happy he was. My mom. She grew up in China with her parents and sister living in basically one room. She had to attend night school where everyone told her she would never make it to college. She didn't, went on to win awards as an architect. She then married my father and moved to the States, where she worked years as a waitress while my dad went to school. Then my dad was killed by a drunk driver. She had 6 months to be remarried, or we had to leave America. She decided she wanted to stay here for me. Because by then my Chinese lacked very badly, I moved here when I was 5. Somehow she found an amazing man who knew our situation and helped us in every bit he could. Then my stepdad got diagnosed with a disease called PSP, where basically he slowly loses every single function he has. These days my mom spends her time turning him in bed every 2 hours to avoid pressure sores, feeding him through his feeding tube, cleaning his incontinence, giving him daily bed baths, all with as much love as the first time they met. She also works a full-time job as an AutoCAD designer while maintaining an amazing backyard garden, while also keeping up with her own gallery and art. She gets around 4-5 hours of sleep every single night, yet somehow every time I see her she has a huge smile on her face and is very energetic and cheerful. I don't know how she does it, but she gives me hope to be an amazing person as she is. I met the guy who was the first person to ever travel across the entire continental US on horseback. He didn't even set out to be the first person to do it. He just went out and did it because he wanted to, and was shocked to find out later that no one had ever done it before. When he also found out that no one had ever traveled from the Canada to Mexico borders on horseback, he set out and did that too. I was on a trip with a group of friends in Alaska, and we met an Austrian guy who looked and spoke like a young Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was several months deep in a solo canoe and overland trip across gates of the Arctic National Park. My mom, when she was in her early 20s, she got bucked out of a moving vehicle and had severe brain damage. She was supposed to be dead within 48 hours, and when she lived, they said she'd be a vegetable for the rest of her life. Instead, she woke up, learned how to walk, talk, read, and function, and walked out of the hospital on her own. I was a mistake that she raised on her own without complaints. She raised me alone, went to school, got into nursing, and weaseled her way out of the projects into an honest-to-God house, without child support for the bulk of my childhood. I can honestly say that I had an amazing childhood, and she never once made me feel like a burden. I have never seen her back down from anything, ever. Somebody trying to break in, well, they ain't gonna get far. Ex-boyfriend threatened her daughter. Bitch, she dares you to open that gate. Boss lowballs her and then has the gall to call her lazy. Have fun. Because she can be put to better use elsewhere. She's now fighting ovarian cancer with a very low chance of surviving. And her response to talking to hospices: I will never talk to them. I'm not done. She was offended they gave up on her. She's in a bad place now, but she's lasted way longer than they anticipated and has even been improving. She just kind of shrugs it off. In her mind, she doesn't have to relearn what English is. So, you know, this should be easy. I wish I was half the woman she is. I once met this girl who was my age, 15 at the time, and competed nationally in swimming. No big deal. Except she lost a foot and hand to a flesh-eating disease. She was so sweet and humble about her wins. My uncle, he was killed in Vietnam in 1966. He enlisted because he hoped it would keep somebody else from being drafted. I grew up looking at the box of medals they sent home with his body. He saved his squad by jumping on top of a grenade that was thrown at them. A guy who fought in the 1956 Hungarian uprising. He fled Hungary as a teenager and ended up a mercenary in Africa and Asia for 20 years. He migrated to New Zealand and worked a lot of the same jobs as my dad. Had more scars and bullet holes in him than I thought possible. My grandma. She broke her neck in a car accident driving in a rural road in winter. The car went into the ditch, and unfortunately no one was around for ages, and night was coming soon. So, she managed to climb out, and for quite a distance to the nearest house. This was decades ago, and now she's almost 90, and despite chronic pain, she's traveled the world, and lives on her own still. I work for my state's parole board, and every 2 years we see this woman who, in all honesty, should be dead. The couple who kidnapped her ended up stabbing her many times. After they both raped her, they left her in a ditch. came back later and stabbed her some more, just to make sure she was dead. She regained consciousness and walked to the nearest gas station. Now she comes to oppose parole every single time they are eligible for it. Hearing her talk about the incident is riveting and awful. I don't know how she does it every 2 years, but she wants to protect other people who might become victims if they are released. Can't think of a number one right now, but met a guy during a summer activity who lived in the mountains upstate, worked as a lumberjack in the logging season, and tuned pianos in the interval. My dad. He served in Vietnam as a Marine, was discharged with a Purple Heart, then joined the Navy, and became a flight surgeon. He could fly F-18s and perform surgery not at the same time. After his military career, he became an emergency room surgeon, always saving lives. He passed in 2013 due to dementia, and left us way too young. He's my absolute hero and hands down the most baddest person I've ever met. His name was Remington Strongman. Badass in name only. Client at my restaurant. Was just a skinny 20-something. Credit card checked out however as far as his name was concerned. Dad has been gone for almost 30 years now. I remember working in the garage with him one day. He was working on a V8 engine block on the bench and needed to move it to the other end of the bench. He grabbed it with 2 arms and started to the other end of the bench. The block slipped out of his grasp and landed on his foot. He did not flinch. He picked it up and placed it on the bench and kept working. At the time I was 6'4" and 235 pounds. I knew then I was never going to mess with him. My grandma. She only had one hand, lost most of her arm in a car accident when she was in her teens. This woman could tie a squirming toddler's shoelaces, trap, skin, process rabbits into a delicious stew to feed the family, and generally run a household of 10 people with one hand. One punch gran. Not a person, but this ginger cat that wandered down our drive one day, one eye missing, what seemed like half of his brain exposed, gashes everywhere, just skin and bones. We fixed him up and named him Butters. He guarded our house with his life and would take on any dog, coyote, anything that tried to come up. He once fell asleep on a visitor's car and clung for dear life a couple miles down the road until our friend realized he had this chunky ass cat sprawled out like a starfish on his back window. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more of Reddit Universe,